The fluorescent lights of the courtroom hummed, a dull counterpoint to the pounding in Tasha's chest. Judge Bowman's gavel echoed, a sharp crack that seemed to reverberate through her very bones. Slater, his face a mask of stunned disbelief, was being led away. The jury, their faces a mixture of shock and disgust, filed out. Just moments ago, his hand had lashed out, a blur of motion, the sting still a phantom sensation on her cheek. The prosecutor, still looking bewildered, hadn't even had time to object. But it didn't matter. It was over. He was done. A grainy image flickered across her internal vision. A flickering streetlight casting long shadows on an alley wall, the muffled sobs of a young woman, the glint of a badge in the darkness. Bakersfield, a city shimmering with heat haze and hidden hurts. That's where it began. That uncomfortable knot in her stomach that told her something wasn't right. It started small, almost imperceptible, like a hairline fracture in the facade of normalcy. A whispered conversation overheard in a diner, a hurried exchange outside a liquor store, a nervous glance averted as a patrol car cruised by. These fragments, seemingly insignificant on their own, coalesced in Tasha's mind, forming a disturbing mosaic. She'd always been drawn to the stories that whispered in the margins, the ones the mainstream media deemed too small, too messy, too inconvenient. The forgotten corners of Bakersfield, the lives lived in the shadows, held a certain magnetism for her. She sees what people don't want to admit, her grandmother used to say, a mixture of pride and concern in her voice. Tasha wasn't interested in the polished narratives, the carefully curated press releases. She wanted the raw, unfiltered truth, the kind that lingered in the air like dust motes in a sunbeam. Her fingers, now trembling slightly, tightened around the worn leather strap of her camera bag. This bag, a constant companion, had been witness to countless stories, each one etched into its worn surface. A broken swing set in a neglected park, a boarded-up storefront with faded advertisements, the hopeful eyes of a young boy clutching a library book. These were the stories of Bakersfield, the ones she felt compelled to tell. Just truth, she murmured, the words barely audible above the courtroom's hushed whispers. Truth was a slippery thing, elusive, often obscured by layers of denial and self-deception. But Tasha had a knack for finding it, for peeling back the layers, for seeing the stories hidden beneath the surface. People opened up to her, drawn to her quiet intensity, her unwavering gaze. She really listens, they would say, a sentiment rarely expressed about journalists. Officer Raymond Slater. The name had become a recurring motif in her investigations, a dark thread woven through the fabric of the city's underbelly. At first, it was just whispers, vague allegations of misconduct, brushed aside by the department. But Tasha had learned to trust her instincts, that unsettling feeling that something was deeply wrong. She started digging, following the whispers, piecing together the fragments of information like a jigsaw puzzle. A late-night traffic stop, a young woman's tearful account of harassment, a pattern of intimidation and abuse of power. The pieces began to fit. Slater wasn't just a bad cop. He was a predator, hiding in plain sight, shielded by his badge and the ingrained deference to authority. He gets too close, a woman confided, her voice trembling. Too familiar, like he owns you. The fear in her eyes mirrored the fear Tasha saw reflected in the faces of other women she interviewed. Months turned into a year. Tasha meticulously documented everything. Audio recordings, video footage, photographs, witness testimonies. Her apartment, usually a haven of organized chaos, became a makeshift command center, walls plastered with notes, timelines, and photographs connected by red string. The air grew thick with the weight of her investigation, the constant hum of her laptop a soundtrack to her relentless pursuit of justice. Sleep became a luxury, replaced by caffeine-fueled nights hunched over her computer, sifting through data, cross-referencing information, searching for the missing links. Doubt gnawed at her, whispering insidious questions in the quiet hours. Was she going too far? Was she seeing patterns where none existed? But then she would recall the faces of the women she had interviewed, Their voices etched in her memory, and her resolve would harden. The shift happened gradually, almost imperceptibly. She wasn't just a local journalist covering underreported incidents anymore. She had become a key figure in a major lawsuit, a symbol of resistance against a system that often protected its own. The personal risks escalated. Anonymous threats, slashed tires, a brick thrown through her window. Fear, a cold knot in her stomach, became a constant companion. But fear, she realized, could be a powerful motivator. Could paralyze you, or it could fuel your determination. For Tasha, it was the latter. She knew she couldn't back down. Too many women had suffered in silence. Their voices needed to be heard. And she was determined to be the one to amplify them. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Mill Creek Park, the air thick with the scent of dust and dry grass. Banners rippled in the warm breeze, their slogans bold against the cloudless sky. A low hum of discontent thrummed through the crowd, punctuated by the occasional chant. Tasha adjusted her camera strap, the weight familiar against her shoulder. The press badge clipped to her jacket felt strangely heavy, a tangible reminder of the responsibility she carried. Her hand tightened around her camera grip, the cool metal grounding her. Stay focused, Tasha. Document, don't react. She scanned the crowd, her lens capturing the faces of frustration, anger, and hope. The protest, organized to address the city's rising housing costs, had a palpable energy. Beneath the surface of public outcry, Tasha sensed a deeper current, a simmering resentment that threatened to boil over. A sudden surge in the crowd drew her attention. A scuffle had broken out near the edge of the park, the protesters' chants escalating into shouts. Tasha raised her camera, zooming in, her pulse quickening. She could make out several police officers pushing through the crowd, their expressions grim. This is it, she thought, her stomach tightening with a mix of anticipation and unease. This is where the story unfolds. She moved closer, her movements careful and deliberate, navigating the throng of bodies with practiced ease. The air crackled with tension. A woman's voice, high and sharp, cut through the noise. Then a man's gruff retort. Tasha adjusted the focus, her lens trained on the escalating confrontation. It was Officer Raymond Slater. She recognized him instantly, the same hard set to his jaw, the same dismissive curl to his lip she'd seen in photographs and heard described in hushed whispers. He was shoving a young protester, his movements rough and unnecessary. The camera felt like a shield, a barrier between her and the unfolding chaos. Yet, it also amplified her sense of helplessness, the frustration of being a mere observer. "I'm with the press," she called out, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in her hands. Slater glanced in her direction, his eyes narrowing. The way he looked at her, a chilling mix of contempt and something darker, sent a shiver down her spine. She'd researched him, pored over every available record, every whispered allegation. She knew what he was capable of, but seeing it firsthand, feeling the weight of his gaze was different. It was a visceral understanding of the power he wielded, the impunity he assumed. "You're interfering with police operations," he snarled, his voice thick with authority. His words were directed at her, but his gaze swept over the crowd, a clear display of dominance. Tasha's breath caught in her throat. The air felt heavy, suffocating. She held her ground, reminding herself of the importance of her work, the stories she needed to tell. "Don't back down, Tasha." She gripped her camera tighter, its weight a source of strange comfort. "I have a right to be here," she said, her voice unwavering. The words felt small, insignificant against the backdrop of escalating tension. But they were true. She repeated them in her mind, a silent mantra against the fear that threatened to consume her. Slater took a step towards her, his shadow falling over her. "You want rights?" he sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'll show you how far those go." He lunged forward, his hand grabbing her arm with bruising force. The camera slipped from her grasp, hitting the ground with a dull thud. A gasp escaped her lips, the air knocked from her lungs. The world seemed to tilt, the sounds of the protest fading into a distant roar. He wouldn't dare, but he did. He was twisting her arm behind her back, the pain sharp and intense. Her press badge dug into her skin, a cruel irony. "You're under arrest," he hissed, his grip tightening. The words echoed in her ears, surreal and disorienting. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but shock held her captive. She could feel the eyes of the crowd on her, their whispers like a buzzing swarm. Shame and anger warred within her, a bitter cocktail of emotions. This can't be happening. This wasn't how she envisioned it. She had prepared for this moment, for the possibility of confrontation, but nothing could have prepared her for the raw, visceral reality of Slater's aggression. As Slater dragged her away, the crowd erupted in a fresh wave of protests. Their shouts seemed to blend together, forming a single unified roar of outrage. Tasha caught glimpses of faces shocked, angry, fearful, and in those fleeting moments, she saw not just individuals, but reflections of herself, reflections of the countless others who had been silenced, dismissed, and brutalized. Their silent stories fueled her resolve, a burning ember in the darkness. "This isn't over, Slater." The thought echoed in her mind, a promise, a vow. This was just the beginning. The silence of her apartment pressed in, a stark contrast to the cacophony that had echoed just hours before. Tasha sat on the edge of her bed, the faint throbbing in her cheek a constant reminder. She touched it gingerly, the phantom sting still lingering. He had hit her. A police officer, sworn to protect, had struck her in broad daylight. The absurdity of it warred with the raw, visceral fear that still coiled in her gut. "He thinks he can get away with this," she thought, her jaw clenching. "He thinks he's invincible." But a flicker of defiance ignited within her. He was wrong. She would make sure of it. The following weeks blurred into a relentless cycle of gathering evidence, consulting with lawyers, and reliving the incident over and over in her mind. Every detail, every word, every nuance of Slater's sneering expression was etched into her memory. She meticulously documented everything: the threatening phone calls, the witnesses who had seen Slater's previous acts of aggression, the hushed whispers in the community about his abuses of power. The weight of it was immense, a leaden cloak draped over her shoulders. "This is more than just me," she realized, the thought solidifying into a steely resolve. "This is for all the women he's silenced." Securing legal representation had been a challenge. Many lawyers in Bakersfield were hesitant to take on a case against a police officer. The power dynamics were complex, the potential repercussions significant. But finally, she found Sarah Jenkins, a young attorney with a fire in her eyes and a reputation for tenacity. "This won't be easy, Tasha," Jenkins had warned, her voice low and serious. "He'll have the backing of the police department, the city, the whole system, really." Tasha had met her gaze, unflinching. "I know the risks," she'd thought, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "But I won't back down." The courtroom felt cold, the air thick with anticipation. Tasha sat rigidly at the plaintiff's table, her heart hammering against her ribs. Across from her, Slater exuded an air of arrogant confidence, his uniform crisp and pristine. "He thinks he's untouchable," she thought, her stomach churning. He smirked, a fleeting, almost imperceptible curl of his lip. It was a challenge, a silent declaration of war. Slater's initial testimony was a carefully constructed narrative of self-defense. He painted himself as the victim, claiming Tasha had been aggressive and uncooperative. He spoke smoothly, confidently, his voice resonating with practiced authority. The jury listened intently, their faces impassive. Tasha felt a wave of nausea wash over her. "They're believing him," she thought despairingly. "They're buying his lies." But Jenkins squeezed her hand reassuringly. It was a silent promise, a reminder that they had a plan. Piece by piece, Jenkins dismantled Slater's fabricated story. She presented Tasha's meticulously documented evidence, exposing the inconsistencies and contradictions in his testimony. She called witnesses who testified to Slater's history of aggressive behavior, his pattern of targeting vulnerable women. With each revelation, Slater's composure began to crack. His confident facade crumbled, replaced by a simmering anger that he barely managed to conceal. Tasha watched him, her heart pounding. He's losing control, she realized, a flicker of hope igniting within her. The turning point came swiftly, unexpectedly. Jenkins presented a recording of Slater's threatening phone calls to Tasha. His voice, laced with menace, echoed through the courtroom. The jury shifted uneasily in their seats. Slater's face contorted with rage. He lunged across the table, his hand lashing out. The slap echoed through the silent courtroom, sharp and brutal. Tasha gasped, her hand flying to her cheek. The room erupted in a cacophony of gasps and murmurs. The slap, a single act of violence, had shattered the illusion of Slater's authority. It was a visceral display of the very aggression he had so vehemently denied. The jury, initially hesitant, now stared at him with open disgust. He's done, Tasha thought, a wave of relief washing over her. He's finally done. Judge Bowman's voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the chaos. Order! Order in the court! He glared at Slater, his eyes blazing with fury. Officer Slater, you are in contempt of court. You are under arrest. Slater stood there, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. The arrogance that had been so prominent just moments before was gone, replaced by a stark, chilling realization. He had destroyed himself. The subsequent days were a blur. The media frenzy surrounding the case was intense. Slater's arrest became national news, a symbol of police brutality and abuse of power. The jury's verdict was swift and decisive. Guilty. Justice had been served. Back in her quiet apartment, Tasha sat by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. The physical pain had faded, replaced by a profound sense of weariness and a quiet satisfaction. The fight had been long and arduous, but she had won. She had not only achieved justice for herself, but had also given a voice to the silent victims who had suffered at Slater's hands. A single tear rolled down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of relief, of closure. The silence of her apartment was no longer oppressive but comforting, a sanctuary of peace after a long and difficult battle. The city lights twinkled in the distance, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope could prevail. The courtroom air hung thick and heavy, a suffocating blanket woven from shock and disbelief. The echo of Slater's outburst, the raw, animalistic sound of it, still vibrated in the silent space. Tasha sat ramrod straight, her outward composure a stark contrast to the storm raging within. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. He touched me. A voice whispered in the back of her mind. He actually touched me. The violation was a physical stain, a cold, creeping dread that settled deep in her bones. But beneath the fear, a flicker of something else ignited a hard, unyielding ember of resolve. This ends now. Judge Bowman's gavel cracked, a sharp sound that sliced through the stunned silence. Order. We will reconvene. His gaze swept across the room, lingering for a fraction of a second on Tasha before moving to Slater, who stood beside his lawyer, his face a mask of barely contained fury. Tasha drew a slow, steadying breath, acutely aware of the jury's eyes on her. 12 pairs of lenses scrutinizing her every move. They're waiting, she thought, waiting to see if I'll break. But she wouldn't. She couldn't. Too much was riding on this. Ms. Hill, you have 4 minutes. Judge Bowman's voice, though even, held an undercurrent of steel. For minutes, a lifetime and a blink of an eye. Tasha rose, her legs surprisingly steady. As she walked towards the evidence table, a dizzying wave of nausea washed over her. Don't faint. Don't you dare faint. She focused on the task at hand, her fingers brushing against the cool metal of the laptop. This was it. The culmination of weeks of meticulous planning, of sleepless nights spent poring over documents and agonizing over every detail. She connected the laptop, the familiar click of the cable, a small, sharp sound in the hushed room. The screen flickered to life, illuminating her face with its pale glow. She met the jury's gazes, holding their collective stare. "You all just heard what actually happened," she began, her voice clear and steady, betraying none of the turmoil within. "Project, let them hear the truth in your voice." He lied under oath, and it wasn't the first time. A murmur rippled through the courtroom, a collective intake of breath. Slater shifted beside his lawyer, his jaw tight, his eyes burning into her. Tasha ignored him, her focus solely on the faces of the jury. She could see the doubt in their eyes, the ingrained skepticism that came with years of ingrained trust in authority. Break through that wall, she urged herself. Show them. She clicked the play button. The audio recording filled the courtroom, Slater's voice, laced with menace, echoing from the speakers. It was the recording from the traffic stop, capturing the escalation, the threats, the palpable fear in her own voice. The jury sat transfixed, their expressions shifting from disbelief to shock to dawning horror. Tasha watched them, her own heart pounding in her chest. This is it. This is the moment. The recording ended, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Tasha took another deep breath, steeling herself for the next part. "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Speak for them. Speak for the ones who couldn't. It's about every woman who didn't have a microphone, who was too afraid to speak up, who was told she was overreacting, that she was imagining things." Her gaze swept over the jury, holding each of their eyes. They were silenced. Their stories were buried. Tasha paused, letting her words sink in. She then displayed photos, blurred faces, and snippets of text messages corroborating the testimonies she had gathered. Each image, each message, a testament to the pattern of Slater's abuse. The courtroom remained utterly silent, the only sound the quiet hum of the projector. Even Slater seemed momentarily stunned, his usual arrogance replaced by a flicker of unease. "You just need to not be afraid of what happens when you do speak up." Tasha's voice, though quiet, resonated with the power of conviction. "It's not just about justice for me. It's about breaking the cycle." She met Judge Bowman's gaze, a silent acknowledgement of her completed testimony. The aftermath was a blur. The hushed whispers, the clicking cameras, the sudden rush of reporters outside the courthouse. The news of the incident, fueled by the viral video, spread like wildfire. Public opinion shifted dramatically. Slater was suspended pending investigation, his career hanging precariously in the balance. Tasha found herself surrounded by a throng of journalists, their questions a relentless barrage. But she remained composed, her voice calm and steady as she reiterated her statement, her commitment to justice unwavering. Inside, however, a different storm raged. Relief warred with exhaustion, the adrenaline fading, leaving behind a profound emptiness. "It's over," a voice whispered in her mind. "It's finally over." But even as she acknowledged the victory, a sliver of unease remained. She knew this was just the beginning of a long and arduous process. The fight for true justice had just begun. The fluorescent hum of the courthouse bathroom was a stark contrast to the cacophony that had just ended. Tasha splashed cold water on her face, the droplets clinging to her eyelashes like miniature prisms. The image staring back at her in the mirror was a stranger, pale, strained, but with a flicker of something new in her eyes. Resilience? She wondered, tracing the faint lines etched around her mouth. Or just exhaustion. She'd won, hadn't she? Slater's career was over. His arrogance, that smug certainty he exuded like a noxious fume, had finally choked him. But the victory felt hollow, a fragile shell echoing with the whispers of all the things she'd lost along the way. Stepping back into the hallway, the sudden barrage of flashing cameras and shouted questions was disorienting. "This is it," a small voice inside her head whispered, "the moment you've been working towards." Yet, the feeling of triumph was elusive, replaced by a strange detachment. She saw the microphones thrust towards her, the reporters' faces blurring into a sea of expectant eyes, and all she could think about was the quiet hum of her laptop, the comforting weight of her pen in her hand. "Ms. Jones, how does it feel to have brought down a corrupt officer?" A voice boomed, cutting through the fog in her mind. "Honestly, relief," she began, her voice surprisingly steady. Because everyone saw him for who he really was. The words felt inadequate, a pale imitation of the torrent of emotions swirling within her. Relief, yes, but also fear, anger, a profound weariness. She forced a smile, a brittle, fleeting thing, aware that it would be dissected, analyzed, and plastered across every news outlet. The questions continued, a relentless barrage probing every detail of the ordeal. But Tasha's mind drifted back to the courtroom, to Slater's face contorted in disbelief, to the silent affirmation in the jury's eyes. It wasn't just about me, she realized, it was about all of them. The next few days were a blur of interviews, phone calls, and the constant hum of social media notifications. Tasha's story had gone viral. The Bakersfield incident, initially a local news item, had become a national talking point, sparking heated debates about police accountability and the abuse of power. The comments section under every article was a battlefield, a clash of opinions, accusations, and defenses. But amidst the noise, something remarkable began to happen. Other women, emboldened by Tasha's courage, started to share their own stories. Whispers became voices, and voices became a chorus, echoing across the digital landscape. One message in particular stood out. It was from a woman named Maria, a single mother who had been harassed by Slater 2 years prior. "I thought I was alone," she wrote. "I thought no one would believe me. Seeing you stand up to him, it gave me strength. I'm not afraid to speak up anymore." Reading those words, a warmth spread through Tasha's chest, chasing away the lingering chill of the courtroom. She thought this is what it was all for. The initial wave of attention eventually subsided, the news cycle moving on to the next sensational story. But the ripples of change continued to spread. Several other women came forward with complaints against Slater, their testimonies painting a disturbing picture of a pattern of misconduct that had gone unchecked for years. An internal investigation was launched within the Bakersfield Police Department, and the City Council announced a review of their policies on police accountability. Tasha watched these developments from a distance, a quiet observer of the storm she had unwittingly unleashed. The weight of responsibility was immense, but so was the sense of purpose. Back in her small apartment, surrounded by stacks of research papers and the comforting glow of her laptop screen, Tasha returned to her work. The world had changed, and so had she. The fear that had once clung to her like a shadow had receded, replaced by a steely resolve. The courtroom, the cameras, the public scrutiny, they had all been a necessary ordeal, a crucible that had forged her into something stronger. She opened a new document, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The words flowed effortlessly, fueled by a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just a journalist anymore. She was a witness, a voice for the voiceless, a testament to the power of truth. The Bakersfield incident was just one story, a single thread in a complex tapestry of injustice. But Tasha knew that even the smallest thread, when pulled with enough force, could unravel the entire fabric. And she was ready to pull. The quiet hum of her laptop, once a solitary pursuit, now resonated with the echoes of countless other voices, whispering their stories into the night, finally finding the courage to be heard. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, Tasha felt a flicker of hope, a fragile but persistent ember burning in the darkness.